Hello, welcome back to KXAN Live. Thanks for joining us here. I do want to mention that we do now have a KXAN Plus app on any streaming platform that you use. That's Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. So if you can download that in the App Store, you can catch these videos as well as other exclusive content on our CTV streaming app. But today we have our Nick's First Warning Weather segment with meteorologist Nick Bannin. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a beautiful day. I know we're worried about fire conditions here over the next couple of days, which we'll talk about. But as long as we do our best to stop fires from beginning originally, then we can actually enjoy what is nice and sunny and dry weather, although I know we do need the rain.
Yeah, and we have been having some really nice sunny, dry weather lately. Feels like we're getting into the springtime. I can see my trees in my backyard blooming, so it's nice to get that fresh air back in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, and our own meteorologist, Freddie Vela, did a story that aired just yesterday because everyone's wondering, when's their grass going to green up? When are the plants going to sprout a little bit more and bloom and things start to turn greener again? Because that will actually lower our fire danger. Well, the expert he talked to said that that's not going to happen till toward the end of March. Into early April. So we've still got to get through the next couple of weeks before that green up happens. And as that green up happens, then there's more moisture in the vegetation. And that does eventually reduce the fire danger. But we still need some rain though, of course.
Yeah, we do. But we are looking ahead today at our winter for this year.
Yeah.
Tell me, what did you see in the latest updates that are coming our way?
Yeah, so first of all, we've been talking about the continuation of La Niña from this past winter. The latest update from the Climate Prediction Center that came out last Thursday is that La Niña should end within the next month. So it should be out of here by April. And of course, La Niña is the cold phase of ENSO, or El Niño Southern Oscillation. This is where we look at the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific that can give us a guide as to what the weather patterns are going to be like here, especially in North America. This affects our winters the most because that's when the connection is the strongest and where you can sort of see the impact on the weather patterns the majority of the time. So what is going on in the Pacific is super important for getting an idea what's going to happen, especially in the winter time. And while it is early, it is still only March. We are starting to get at least some idea what is likely or more what is least likely as we head into next winter. So the Climate Prediction Center puts out their ENSO odds, whether we're leaning toward neutral, which here is listed in the gray coloring, or whether we're looking at La Niña conditions or El Niño conditions. And Esme, I don't know whether we can get rid of that lower bar. I should keep remembering to make these graphics not quite as down to the bottom of the screen there. But basically, you can see that we're expecting to head into this neutral period beginning in the next month. And then you can see the 3-month increments there at the bottom of your screen. So February, March, April, high odds of being in neutral. And then those odds go up even more as we head into March, April, May, which is MAM, and then April, May, June, still decent odds there of neutral. And then you start to see the odds of neutral, this neutral pattern, which is neither La Niña or El Niño, slowly coming down as we get past summer and into fall and approaching winter of next year. At the same time, in the red bars, that's the odds of El Niño. Now remember, this last winter was La Niña. El Niño is the opposite. It's the warm phase of ENSO, and those odds start to slowly go up as we head into the late summer and fall. SON there is September, October, November. And then OND is October, November, December. So the odds for El Niño go up a little bit, but they're not nearly as high as the odds are for La Niña or neutral going into next winter. So OND, October, November, December, remember, leads into meteorological winter, which begins in December. And right now, the odds are dead even, either La Niña or ENSO neutral, being the most two likely phases of ENSO going into next winter. Now, there's something that the National Weather Service and NOAA and the folks over at the Climate Prediction Center talk about called the spring predictability barrier. That basically means that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the spring months regarding what happens next winter. And you have to almost get past spring before you have much higher confidence about what's going to happen in the next winter time. So we won't have high confidence on next winter until, say, we get into summer. Then we'll have a much better idea what winter's going to look like. So our discussion today is not so much what next winter's going to be, just more what next winter's unlikely to be, which is El Niño. Those odds are far lower than the odds of La Niña or ENSO neutral going into next year. Now, this is what a typical El Niño winter would look like, of which the odds are the lowest. And that's pretty wet for the southwestern U.S., the south, here in central Texas, the southeastern U.S. too. And it just so happens that a lot of the southern tier of states are starting to see their drought getting worse. The southwestern U.S., including Southern California, Las Vegas, much of Arizona, New Mexico, here in Texas. And then the southeastern U.S., when we're looking at places like most of Florida, portions of Georgia and the Carolinas, all have seen growing drought, and certainly here in central Texas, we've seen a more significant drought starting to develop. So when we go back to what an El Niño winter usually brings, it's wetter weather along the southern states, the southwest and the southeast included. And this is what is unlikely to be happening next winter, which is a real shame because of where we're seeing the drought set up here in central Texas and along those southern states. We would really love an El Niño winter to be looking more likely next winter, because then it would lean itself more toward a wetter than normal winter, which aids in our drought and can sometimes set us up for more rain in the spring and cooler temperatures in the summer. So we're able to sort of not rule it out just yet. It's still too early to rule out El Niño next winter, but it's just seeming much more unlikely than the other phases of ENSO. So then we start to look at, okay, well, what is more likely? So either a neutral pattern where the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific don't really have an impact on our climate pattern, of which we'll then have to start to look at other things. Or it's La Niña, which we just finished having, a winter of La Niña, which are typically warmer and drier than normal. This past winter was actually fairly average, pretty close to average anyway for temperatures, but way below average for rain. So we just finished a drier than normal winter that was a La Niña winter. And then if we're looking ahead to next winter, which is either looking neutral or La Niña again, then the odds would not necessarily be in our favor for more rain here in central Texas, which is a real shame. Mm-hmm. Now, we mentioned the drought. This is how much it's changed in the last 4 months in central Texas. We've gone from some areas of a extreme drought, which is a 3 out of 4. And now a good chunk of central Texas is at a 3 out of 4. And we even have some now 4 out of 4 exceptional drought. This is the first time, this past week was the first time that we've seen exceptional drought or level 4 out of 4 drought here in central Texas since October of 2023. So it's actually been quite a while since we've had a drought this bad, but it's easy to see why, and we've been sort of seeing it coming. Look at the rain this month. We're already down 1.25 inches. Rain since the beginning of the year, we're down more than 2 inches compared to where we should be. The rain last year, we had 8 inches fewer than we should have had. So, and that's on top of previous rainfall deficits before last year. So it's all been coming together to give way to the drought that we're in right now. And while, we're still, and certainly too far away from guaranteeing what's going to happen next winter, we're starting to see some of the cards lining up away from a El Niño winter and instead toward that neutral or another La Niña winter. Esme?
And when you say that we may be going towards a La Niña winter, what does that mean? What can we expect for the drought conditions of next year? I know you said they're going to be really, really high drought conditions. Can we be seeing a riskier wildfire season? So
some of it depends on what happens this spring, because La Niña winter typically drier than normal, and that's what we had. We could still have a wetter than normal spring, although this March has started dry. But April, if we get slow moving storms, same for May into early June, we can actually make up some of the difference of what we've had. And then who knows what type of improvements we may or may not see this summer in the drought. So it's hard to say what type of drought situation we'll be in going into next winter. All we're saying here is that a La Nina winter, which is seeming to be one of the two options for next winter, either La Nina or neutral. La Nina would mean likely another drier than normal winter for us next winter. Neutral would mean sort of average. So, and El Nino is wetter than normal. So we're not looking wetter than normal next winter if El Nino ends up not materializing.
And for some of our viewers who don't know how these outlooks are measured, what methods do the scientists use to predict these outlooks into the winter months?
So a lot of it is sea surface temperature analysis. And then they can also look at what the water temperatures are doing deep down into the ocean as well. So this particular map here is a map of the sea surface temperature anomalies. The blue meaning colder than normal. The orangish reddish colors indicating warmer than normal temperatures at the surface. But we also have some data about what the water is doing below the surface, and that can give us an idea if that colder than normal water is coming up from the depths of the ocean, that eventually the sea surface temperatures will start to cool off. So we can get some sort of sense going into the future what that's going to happen. And then we can also see not just the water temperatures themselves, whether they're leaning toward El Nino, La Nina, or neutral, but what types of atmospheric connections are we seeing as well? Are we seeing a weather pattern that is more reflective of being in a La Nina? And this past winter, while the water temperatures were sort of only a little bit colder than normal, barely La Nina, there was more of an atmospheric connection than is typical for those types of temperatures. And some of the discussions among the scientific weather community have been, as our waters are warming, we maybe should reevaluate how we're determining the strength of La Nina. Because if all the waters are a little warmer, then we may not get the waters to be as cold as they used to be to create, say, a moderate or a strong La Nina, but we could still get the atmosphere to react like there's a strong La Nina. So if we make some subtle adjustments to the calculation, this past La Nina winter was actually perhaps a stronger one than it was on paper based on the water temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. So you can look at a lot of those water temperatures to tell you a sign of where things are going as well as how the atmosphere is reacting to that.
And Nick, how might the prediction of this year's ENSO conditions influence climate change and long-term extreme weather occurrences?
Hard to say. Sometimes when you have, so our warming climate is a factor in all things. But then when you have El Nino patterns, which is the warm phase of ENSO, El Nino years are often our warmest years. And they stand out even as our climate is warming. You could pick out the El Nino years and seeing those being particularly warm. So if we went back to a La Nina winter, which is the cold phase of ENSO, then that may help to mitigate in some way the warming effects of climate change, but not entirely. They are related, but one is not necessarily causing the other. But sometimes it can make it harder to spot what phase we're heading into because of the warming effects of climate change, especially warming of the waters. It may look not quite as textbook of a El Nino, a La Nina, or a neutral pattern because of the warming waters caused by climate change.
So there's a lot that goes into it. And
so many factors,
we can predict from this far out.
Yeah, surprisingly, I mean, I mentioned this spring predictability barrier, meaning once you get past spring, then the forecast accuracy goes way up for next winter. So there is that, but the ENSO forecasts are actually surprisingly accurate, being months out ahead of time. I know sometimes we have difficulties in short-term forecasts because we're trying to be super specific about a temperature at night, a high temperature during the day, the timing of thunderstorms, that sort of thing. But these are bigger scale things that are actually a little easier to predict months ahead of time. In fact, sometimes several months ahead of time. That we saw this past winter's La Nina coming sort of last summer, from what I remember. So we had a good 6 months heads up of what type of winter we were heading into. Right now it's March, and we're getting some inklings about what to expect, and after the spring, then we'll have better confidence. So these long-term forecasts, because they're a little more broad, they're not saying exactly how much rain you're going to get, the timing exactly, and they're speaking of seasons as a whole, not necessarily in particular days. They're actually fairly accurate even this far out.
And I know we did this exact same topic, like you mentioned, last summer.
Yeah.
What would you rate the prediction that we looked at last summer compared to what our winter looked like?
Yeah, so from what I remember anyway, and memory, as a dad, I'm sort of filling up my mind with all sorts of kid issues too. From what I remember, we were talking about a La Nina winter, a good 6-7 months ahead of time last year.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite as early as we are mentioning it here today, but still early enough. And but not every La Nina winter is the same too. We were looking at winter being warmer and drier than normal. That's just the typical here in Central Texas. Well, temperatures ended up being near average, so not too much warmer than normal. In fact, I think it was 1/10 of a degree colder than normal for the past winter. We had a record warm December, but then January and February had several rounds of Arctic air coming in that it ended up balancing it out, and it almost came a wash, and the temperatures for the winter were fairly average. Usually you would have expected that winter in a La Nina pattern would have been warmer than normal here in Central Texas. But on the flip side, we were looking at typical La Nina winter conditions as far as the rain goes, being drier than normal. And it was drier than normal. We missed out on, I think, more than 2 inches of rain in the winter, which is not what you want to see. You want to see that part being wrong and getting more rain than you expect. But the previous winter, an El Nino winter, we're all about it being a wetter than normal winter. Now, wetter than normal, people think, oh gosh, we're going to get flooding everywhere and so much rain and the lakes are going to fill up. Now, that didn't happen, but we did end up getting about 2-3 inches more rain than a typical winter last winter, not the one we just had, but the one before. And so it did live up to the expectations as far as precipitation goes. So we do have a generally good handle on these seasonal forecasts for the most part, but there's always some room for error. But as far as whether La Nina happened, it did. Did El Nino happen the previous winter? It did. Those forecasts are very accurate, even months ahead of time. So that's why we're talking about it in March, with not specifics just yet, because it looks like it could be a toss-up between neutral or La Nina. But we've got a pretty good idea that it's probably not going to be El Nino. But, you mentioned the wildfire risk that we can talk about here now. If we don't get the beneficial rains that we come to expect in the spring months here in Central Texas, that come with severe weather and storms too, and then we head into the summer still on a significant rainfall deficit like we've built up during the winter, that we built up last year and the prior years, and then we head into summer too dry, then that's likely to make us hotter than normal, which then therefore in turn dries us out even more. It could be a vicious cycle when you talk about drought and heat, leading to more drought, leading to more heat. So we've got to wait and see as far as what this spring does before we can make any projections about what a wildfire danger would be like next winter.
And speaking of wildfire dangers, what is the update on the crabapple fire that we have been tracking in Fredericksburg?
Yeah, so we got some new information here just within the last hour about that. They still 85% contained. They made some subtle adjustments to the acreage, a little more, I think about another 100 acres more than they originally thought, not because the fire spread, just because their mapping continues to improve as far as where the fire was able to burn. But conditions there, obviously it's been windy all day. We haven't seen the amount of containment go up today. It's at 85%, which is where it was yesterday. But I know that they're still working on that. And then we had another fire in southwestern Gillespie County. That was actually updated with a reduction in the number of acres. It was originally 50 acres. Now it's actually closer to 36. So that was some good news there. But let's dive into the fire risk. It is windy, as you can see right now. These are the gusty, blustery conditions at the Allied Medical Emergency Room there in Bastrop, where we've got the cameras flailing around there in the wind. We've had gusts up to 45 miles per hour already in Austin. Right now, closer to 30.
These winds have been picking up lately.
I know, and these are south winds, which is a more humid wind for us. Wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to bring a westerly and then northwesterly wind, and then eventually a north wind, which blows in dry air into central Texas, which could only cause some additional fire concerns. Relative humidity values, though, are higher than they were this time yesterday. Yesterday, we had some relative humidity numbers down in the teens. Today, they're in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So we're in a better position as far as the relative humidity goes. But still, given how dry we are, the fire danger today is still a 3 or 4 out of 5. So high or very high. Just yesterday, it was very high or extreme, depending on where you were. So today, we've seen about a 1.5 category improvement as far as the fire danger goes. But look at tomorrow. We're pretty concerned about tomorrow because the wind's going to be strong, although not quite as strong as today, but the air is going to be so much drier. That means that the vegetation really dries out. There's plenty of fuel for a fire to spread quickly. Then you add the wind on top of that, and then things could get dangerous. But of course, Esme, the key is prevention. Yes. 90% or more of wildfires are started by humans. And that's terrible. But it also gives us some power to prevent these things from even happening. Mm-hmm. So if you dispose of smoking materials appropriately, if you do what you can to reduce the chances of any sparks, you make sure that your heavy machinery is not causing that, or you're doing it in an area where those sparks could be contained, then we could be in a much better position. Then we're just talking about a windy and dry day. But because these days have a history of producing fires, human caused or not, we've got to get ahead of it. And we've got another red flag warning. These are issued for high fire danger days, those particularly high days. This is from Wednesday morning all the way through Wednesday evening at 9. So we're looking at gusts up to 35 miles per hour, if not slightly higher. And then they use relative humidity values less than 15% and likely in the single digits. So let's just walk you through the timing of the wind here. Let me slow this map down just a little bit. All right, so this evening, winds gusting out of the south for the most part, 25 to 40 miles per hour. We've got a wind advisory, by the way, that continues through much of the evening for the wind gusts. We could also see some isolated power outages come out of just the wind alone before we even talk about the fire concern. And then we head into tomorrow morning, and then we start seeing the arrival of our next cold front. This one should get into the metro, say 5 to 7 in the morning, 4 to 6 maybe. Then it's in our eastern counties by 7. And then it brings in that drier wind that picks up quite a bit as we head through the late morning, especially in the hill country where the strongest winds will be here tomorrow. And then the wind gusts stay notable here into the afternoon, although not quite as strong as the morning. And then the wind gusts really drop off as we head into Wednesday night and Thursday morning. So improvements happen by Thursday morning, but we've still got what could be a challenging day for firefighters here tomorrow with the gusty winds. And the reason that tomorrow's going to be worse, not necessarily the wind, it's the dry air. Relative humidity goes up tonight, but then notice how it comes tumbling down with that cold front tomorrow. Wow. You don't really need us to draw the front on the map. You can see the difference between the more humid air with relative humidity values up around 90% or higher. And then that dry cold front blows in the dry wind, sucks out the moisture, and you can see the relative humidity numbers drop into the single digits here tomorrow afternoon. But then they gradually do come up Wednesday night to Thursday morning. So not only do the wind goes down, the wind gusts go down, but we also see the relative humidity values going up there during that period. So it's going to be a tricky day for us tomorrow, tricky day for people who are trying to prevent fires, put them out. And we certainly, our hats go off to all the firefighters who've been working so much over the last few days, especially. I think tomorrow's going to be another tricky day for them. But once we get to Thursday, wind gusts come down, relative humidity comes up, and then we can be a little happier with our weather situation at that point.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, most of these wildfires are caused by humans, so we know that we can make an impact, we can stop that from happening. It's our actions that show us what goes on.
Yeah, and it's almost the best thing about this is that there's a lot of other types of weather we can't do anything about. The wildfire weather danger is there when you've got the wind and the dry air, but you're not going to get a fire unless you've got lightning, of course. But you're not going to get a fire otherwise unless us humans start one. Now, many of those fires are started accidentally, so it's not all arson. So that means you got to just think a little bit more about, are the activities I'm doing likely to cause a spark?
Be cautious.
Think worst case scenario. Okay, if I'm doing this and something goes out of hand, will that cause a fire? And that's the type of activity that you try and refrain from doing on weather days like tomorrow.
Now, we do have this article on our website right now published, and it's on our homepage. What is this article touching on?
Yeah, so this goes back to the early indications for what we're talking about winter. This is by far from us giving you a winter forecast. It is way too early for that. I recognize the limitations in the science of meteorology that we could not accurately give you a winter forecast this far out. But we can give you some signs about what we're looking at already, and the indications that El Niño being less likely is sort of the key takeaway here, and then the impacts on the drought or what stands out to us there. So we look at then what that usually means as far as a neutral winter or especially a La Niña winter and what that could mean for us yet again. Now, these El Niño updates come out from the Climate Prediction Center once a month, sort of around the 8th, 9th, 10th of the month usually. So we'll be able to continue to update you every single first third of the month when these new outlooks come out, just in case we're starting to see any changes in that October, November, December range. And then next month that we talk, that will then extend into January of the following year, 2026, and then February, the month after that. So that's the full winter, December through February, meteorological winter. So by that point, we'll have gotten through spring as well, and we'll be into summer, and we'll see a full look into next winter, and we should have a much better idea. And by the way, Esme, sometimes you ask me on a Tuesday what we're going to be talking about next week.
Yes, I do, all the time.
I know you're so excited. So right now it is March 18th as we record this. Later this week, we're going to get the monthly outlook for April. So you and I will be able to talk about the April forecast next week.
So we can take a look at what spring is really going to look like.
Yeah, so we're already in spring now. Meteorological spring is here. Of course, astronomical spring begins this Thursday. And then we've got April to follow, which is usually more spring-like, of course, as temperatures continue to warm. So we'll give you a preview of that April outlook next Tuesday if you join us then.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick.
Thanks for having me.